Universal Design for Learning. In this section, we're going to be looking at strategies for creating more inclusive content. So, what can you do to design a more inclusive learning experience for your students? I think this cartoon is a good place to start. You should really think about trying to build in accessibility from the very start of your course, rather than retrofitting it. So, an acronym that's really helpful when thinking about accessibility is PAW. Your content should be perceivable, operable, understandable and robust. So what does perceivable mean? Well, you need to make sure that learners can see and hear your content. So this involves things like adding alternative text to images and other visuals, providing transcripts or closed captions for videos, making sure that there's sufficient colour contrast between text and the background, and making sure you don't rely on colour alone to convey meaning. So, what are alternative descriptions? These are the little bits of text that appear when you hover over images, or if the image doesn't display in your online content. They're an absolute necessity for any student who uses a screen reader, so that the computer can read aloud whatever the image is. And they can provide students with richer context and ensure understanding for global students. They're also essential for anyone who has a poor internet connection. So, when designing content, consider whether your images are essential for understanding or whether they're merely decorative features. Mentioned for videos, it's important that you have captions. They're necessary for any student who is deaf or has hearing issues, but they're also helpful for other students who are somewhere where they cannot play sound. There's evidence that they support retention and comprehension. Seeing the words on screen at the same time as hearing them can support some learners and can help any language learners. Evidence from the University of Oregon is that 90% of students prefer to have captions with videos. It may be that you're using videos that you haven't created yourself, perhaps from a source such as YouTube. Consider whether it's essential or supporting. If it is the essential resource, then you must choose content that has captions or create a transcript. Another issue that some of your students will have problems with is colour contrasts and colour blindness. 8% of all men and 0.5% of all women suffer from colour blindness. And for the majority of those, it's red-green colour blindness. So that means that if you are using those two colours to distinguish between a good idea and a bad idea, for example, if you are highlighting work or marking it, then those students wouldn't be able to distinguish between what you've marked in green and what you've marked in red. Colourblind people don't see the same colours, so you need to consider a range of colour blindness. Some of the unfriendly combinations that people might use include green-red, purple-blue and light green-yellow. When creating your content, you should think about students who have dyslexia. Make sure that you use readable fonts. It's generally recommended that you use sans serif fonts of 12 to 14 point for any content that will be consumed online. You should also think about the headings and structure of your content. A student with dyslexia may be looking for subheadings to help them find different sections in the text more easily. This will also benefit other learners. When writing something online, you should think about the background. Use a single colour, don't use something with a pattern that will distract the eye. And with the layout, it's important that you left align the text rather than justifying it. So don't think about a margin on either side, just have the margin on the left. If you justify the text, then you end up with what are known as rivers throughout the text of bands of white that can distract the eye. And also think about your writing style. Can you use shorter sentences? Are there words that you need to explain so that your readers can understand better? The next step of the acronym is operable. To make sure learners can interact with your content with a variety of tools, you need to provide a clear structure with properly marked up headings. You need to create descriptive links that make sense out of context. You need to provide sufficient time for interaction and response, and of course you must avoid content that can trigger seizures. So think about headings in documents. They make it easier for all learners to quickly scan documents, and without them, your documents can appear unorganised. Also, if you're using a proper heading structure in a tool such as Word, you can easily generate a table of contents. If you don't have headings, then it makes it difficult for people who use screen readers to navigate the text because they're not able to jump to sections within it. If you're considering making your PowerPoints more accessible, strongly recommend that you use a built-in template and then you go in and edit the slide master. Normally, you would assume that somebody will read the title of a slide first, then the main content, perhaps look at an image on the slide, and then read the footer. Whilst Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint are really good when it comes to accessibility, the inbuilt reading order of a PowerPoint slide is not intuitive. The slide I just described to you, you would hear the footer first, then a description of the image, then the main body of the text, followed by the title. Now, it is recommended that you reorder those elements on your slides so that when somebody is looking through on a screen reader, they will hear the title of the slide first. Final tip to make your slides more accessible is you can copy and paste the key text into the notes field. This means that someone can scan through very quickly if they're using a screen reader. Another question I get asked about regularly is whether to just create PDFs. Some people believe that these are more accessible, but unless you've worked on them to make them more accessible, they're not innately more accessible than a well-planned Word document or PowerPoint document. So, if you give students the original files, there's lots of flexibility for them to access them in a way that meets their needs. There are all sorts of accessibility tools available online and in the native file formats themselves. If you're a student or a member of staff with an @sotton.ac.uk email address, then you'll have access to Office 365. However, there are occasions when PDFs are appropriate, perhaps if specialist software has been used or if there's very specific formatting that you need to preserve. I sometimes see content such as this as well, a scanned document that is not easy to read. Problems with this are that the text is an image, so it's no longer possible for a screen reader to access the content. And it's very difficult for someone to highlight or annotate this for notes, and it slows down reading and distracts from comprehension. That's without me going into any of the issues around copyright. The next section of the acronym is understandable. To make sure learners can understand your content and enjoy a predictable experience, you need to clarify expectations through clear directions and models, follow conventions to ensure a predictable and consistent experience, use plain language, and indicate the language of your content. So overall, students generally want a holistic view of their programme. Can they see at a glance what they're going to have to do? And then the last letter of the acronym R, robust. To ensure your content works well with current and future technologies, you need to add metadata to make content easier to find and use, perform an accessibility check, and perform basic assistive technology testing. If you feel you're not capable of doing all of those, I'd recommend you at least perform an accessibility check. Most Microsoft products will have an accessibility checker inbuilt.